The Blackwell Inheritance. An unsolved case, a Detective Sherman investigation. Content warning. The following story contains descriptions of crime scenes, discussions of murder, and themes of betrayal that may be disturbing to some viewers. This content is intended for mature audiences 18 years and older. Legal disclaimer. All names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. While based on investigative techniques, this story is presented for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to specific cases may be coincidental or generalized to protect ongoing investigations. Introduction. The midnight rain tapped against my office window like impatient fingers, creating shadows that danced across the case files scattered on my desk. I'm Detective Marcus Sherman, and for 32 years I've specialized in cases that others have abandoned, the mysteries that haunt victims' families and taunt law enforcement with their stubborn refusal to be solved. Have you ever had that feeling in the pit of your stomach when your instincts scream that something isn't right, but you can't explain why? That feeling has saved my life more times than I can count. It's also the reason I was staring at my phone at 2:13 a.m. when it finally rang. Sherman, I need you in Blackwell Harbor, tomorrow. The voice belonged to Police Chief Ronald Bates, a man who called me only when he had exhausted all other options. His tone told me everything I needed to know this case had broken him. What am I looking at? I asked, already reaching for my notepad. It's the Blackwell estate murder. 4th anniversary approaching, and we've got nothing but a family tearing itself apart and a town divided. But there's been a development, something that might break it open. I need fresh eyes. The Blackwell case. Even I had heard whispers about it, though I'd been working overseas when it happened. A wealthy patriarch found dead in his locked study inside his isolated mansion during a family gathering. No forced entry, security system armed, and a room full of potential heirs, each with their own reason to want Gregory Blackwell dead. Think about that for a moment. A man murdered in plain sight with only family members present, yet no one saw anything. Or so they claimed. Would you believe them? What secrets would you be willing to protect or expose if it were your family? I'll be there, I said, already mentally packing my bag. There's something else, Davis hesitated. The family doesn't know I've called you. Eleanor Blackwell Gregory's widow, she still has considerable influence in this town. She's made it clear she considers the case closed. I've never been particularly concerned with what wealthy people want closed. Noted, I replied. I'll see you tomorrow. As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that this case would be different. The unsolved ones always leave a particular kind of wound on a community, one that festers beneath the surface until the truth, however painful, finally allows healing to begin. Before I continue, I should warn you, what I discovered in Blackwell Harbor challenged everything I thought I knew about human nature. As you follow this investigation with me, ask yourself what you would do if faced with the same impossible choices. Some secrets are buried so deep that bringing them to light threatens to destroy everyone involved. The rain intensified as I began to pack, nature's own warning of the storm I was about to enter. By morning, I would be in Blackwell Harbor, a picturesque coastal town with an ugly secret. Like many beautiful things, its appealing surface concealed something rotten at the core. How far would you go to protect your family's legacy? What truths would you be willing to bury? As I drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward Blackwell Harbor, these questions echoed in my mind. I didn't know then that finding the answers would nearly cost me my life. The arrival. The drive to Blackwell Harbor took just over 4 hours, the scenery gradually transforming from urban sprawl to rolling countryside before finally giving way to dramatic coastal views. The town itself seemed frozen in time, Victorian mansions overlooking the harbor, charming storefronts lining the main street, and fishing boats bobbing in the distance. Picture perfect. Too perfect. In my experience, places that work this hard to maintain appearances usually have the most to hide. I met Chief Davis at a diner on the outskirts of town, his suggestion, not mine. Fewer eyes, he explained as he slid into the booth across from me. The bags under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept well in years. This case had aged him. Start from the beginning, I said after the waitress had brought our coffee and retreated out of earshot. Davis pulled out a worn file, opening it to reveal crime scene photos. Gregory Blackwell, 68, found dead in his study 4 years ago during the annual family gathering to discuss the distribution of the Blackwell shipping fortune. Cause of death: single gunshot wound to the chest. The door was locked from the inside. Window was securely fastened. No signs of forced entry. I studied the photos. The victim sat slumped in an expensive leather chair behind an antique desk. Blood had spread across his white dress shirt in a crimson bloom. On the desk, a tumbler of whiskey, financial documents, and a small decorative box, its lid open. The murder weapon, I asked? Never found. A .38 caliber revolver, based on the bullet recovered. The Blackwell estate is 12 acres with extensive gardens and access to the waterfront. We dragged the harbor, searched every inch of the grounds. Nothing. I tapped the photo showing the study door. You said it was locked from the inside? Davis nodded grimly. Key was still in the lock on the inside. When they couldn't get an answer from Gregory, the family eventually broke down the door. That's when they found him. Who discovered the body? Eleanor Blackwell, the victim's wife, along with their son Michael and Gregory's brother Victor. According to their statements, Gregory had announced he wanted time alone to review some papers before dinner. About an hour later, Eleanor went to call him to dinner but received no response to her knocking. I flipped through the photos, stopping at one that showed the full room. Security system? State of the art. No alerts, no signs it was compromised. The technician who designed it personally verified that it was functioning correctly. Who was present at the house that evening? I asked, reaching for my notebook. Davis slid a typed list across the table. Eleanor Blackwell, the wife. Michael Blackwell, their son. Diana Blackwell, their daughter. Victor Blackwell, Gregory's younger brother. Catherine Blackwell, Victor's wife. James Patterson, Diana's husband. Olivia Richardson, Eleanor's sister. Marcus Richardson, Olivia's husband. And Sophia Chen, Michael's fiancée at the time. 9 people, each with their own relationship to the victim, their own potential motives. Staff? The regular household staff had been given the evening, apparently a tradition during these family meetings. The only non-family member present was Sophia Chen. I studied the list again. What about alibis? Davis's expression told me everything. That's where it gets complicated. They were all in different parts of that massive house. Some together, some alone. But the timing of death gave them each a window of opportunity. And the inheritance? Who benefited from Gregory's death? Everyone and no one, Davis replied, his voice tinged with frustration. Gregory had been hinting at major changes to his will. The family meeting that night was supposedly to discuss those changes. With him dead before any modifications were made, the estate was divided according to the existing will. Eleanor got the house and controlling interest in the shipping company, with smaller shares distributed among the children and brother. I looked up from my notes. So everyone had something to gain by preventing these changes, but no one knew exactly what those changes would be? Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting. Davis leaned forward. 4 days ago, Eleanor Blackwell's personal assistant found a sealed envelope in a hidden compartment in Gregory's desk apparently missed during our initial investigation. It contained what appears to be draft notes for his new will, along with some cryptic references to family secrets that needed to be addressed. Now we were getting somewhere. Where's this envelope now? In evidence lockup? I've kept it quietly myself and the assistant know about it. I considered the timing. Why would this assistant suddenly find this envelope 4 years later? Davis's expression darkened. Eleanor is selling the estate. The assistant was helping clear out Gregory's study. I'd like to think it's coincidence, but but there are no coincidences in murder investigations. Just conveniences and inconveniences. I need to see the envelope, the crime scene, and I'll need to interview each family member. The family isn't going to like this case being reopened. I fixed Davis with a steady gaze. I don't particularly care what they like, Chief. Someone in that house killed Gregory Blackwell, and 4 years is a long time to live with that kind of secret. As we left the diner, the morning sun illuminated the town below. Beautiful, serene Blackwell Harbor, named for the family whose fortune had built it and whose secrets now threatened to tear it apart. One more thing, Davis said as we reached our cars. There's a memorial service planned for Gregory this weekend. 4th anniversary of his death. The entire family will be gathered at the estate again. I couldn't have asked for better timing. Having them all in one place would make my job considerably easier. I hope you know what you're getting into, Shernan, Davis warned. The Blackwells aren't just any family in this town. They are this town. I've investigated powerful families before. The wealthier the family, the darker the secrets. And somewhere among the Blackwells was a killer who had managed to commit the perfect murder in plain sight, or so they thought. The Blackwell Estate. The Blackwell Estate loomed against the afternoon sky, a Victorian monstrosity perched on the highest point overlooking the harbor. 3 stories of dark stone, ornate turrets, and mullioned windows that seemed to watch my approach with suspicion. Wrought iron gates bearing the Blackwell family crest and osprey clutching a key opened silently as Davis's car approached. The family doesn't know you're coming? I confirmed as we drove up the winding driveway. Eleanor knows the department is sending a consultant to review the case. She doesn't know it's you specifically. Interesting choice of words. Why would my identity matter? Davis's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Your reputation precedes you, Shernan. You're known for not letting go once you've got your teeth into a case regardless of who gets hurt in the process. I didn't bother denying it. The truth often hurts. That doesn't mean it should stay buried. The driveway curved around an elaborate fountain before ending at the main entrance. Standing on the steps, waiting with the rigid posture of someone accustomed to command, was a woman I immediately recognized as Eleanor Blackwell. Even at 64, Eleanor remained striking silver hair swept into an elegant updo, posture straight as a blade, eyes sharp and assessing. She wore her grief, like she wore her obviously expensive charcoal dress with dignity and without apology. Chief Davis, she nodded curtly before turning her gaze to me. And you must be the consultant. I extended my hand, Detective Marcus Shernan, Mrs. Blackwell. Thank you for allowing me access to your home. Her handshake was firm but brief. Let me be clear, Detective. I'm cooperating out of respect for the chief and the approaching anniversary of my husband's death. However, I have serious reservations about disrupting our family's healing process by dredging up this tragedy again. I understand your concern, I replied, meeting her gaze directly. My goal is to find answers, not cause additional pain. Something flickered in her eyes doubt, perhaps, or something deeper. We shall see. Please follow me. The interior of the Blackwell mansion was even more impressive than its exterior soaring ceilings, marble floors, and artwork that belonged in museums rather than private homes. Every surface gleamed with the attention of meticulous care, yet the house felt cold, as though warmth had been systematically removed along with dust. The study remains as it was, Eleanor explained as she led us down a long hallway. After the initial investigation, I couldn't bear to change anything. It's been locked since then, and yet your assistant was recently in there? I asked casually. Eleanor stopped walking, turning slowly to face me. I see Chief Davis has been thorough in his briefing. Yes, Marissa was helping me catalog items for the estate sale. That's when she found the envelope. May I ask why you've decided to sell the estate after all this time? Her expression revealed nothing. This house holds too many memories, Detective. Not all of them pleasant. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have arrangements to finalize for the memorial service. Chief Davis knows where everything is. I'll be available for questions later if needed." With that, she glided away, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and unanswered questions in her wake. Davis produced a key and unlocked a heavy oak door at the end of the hallway. "Gregory's study," he explained unnecessarily. The room was frozen in time, preserved like a museum exhibit dedicated to a man's final moments. Heavy curtains kept the space in perpetual twilight, the air stale and undisturbed. The leather chair behind the massive desk still bore the subtle indentation of its last occupant. I moved methodically around the space, absorbing details. A wall of books classics, history, business texts many with notations in the margins. A bar cart with crystal decanters. Family photographs arranged precisely on one wall, the faces smiling at a camera while hiding God knows what behind their eyes. And then there was the desk, the centerpiece of the room, and the spot where Gregory Blackwell had spent his final moments. I circled it slowly, noting the arrangement of items. The blotter, the pen set, the empty tumbler, the small decorative box. "This box," I pointed. "Was it tested for fingerprints?" "Of course," Davis replied. "Only Gregory's were found on it." I carefully opened it. Empty, lined with velvet. What was kept in here? According to Eleanor, Gregory stored an antique pocket watch, incite family heirloom. It was found on his body. I continued my examination, crouching to study the desk from different angles. "Show me where the hidden compartment was discovered." Davis indicated a nearly invisible seam in the ornate woodwork of the desk's right panel. The assistant pressed this carved leaf, which released a spring mechanism. Clever. I pressed the indicated spot, and a small drawer slid silently open. Empty now, of course. The envelope had been removed to evidence. And in 4 years of investigation, no one found this? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. Davis looked uncomfortable. The department conducted a thorough search, but not thorough enough. I finished for him. Or perhaps someone knew exactly where to look when the time was right. I stood and moved to the window. Despite the chief's claim that it had been securely fastened, I tested it myself. Noting the stiffness of the latch of confirmation, it hadn't been regularly used. The view from the window overlooked the back gardens, and beyond them the glittering expanse of the harbor, beautiful and isolating. I could see a boathouse at the water's edge and several garden structures that could potentially hide evidencer, a murder weapon, for years. "I need to see that envelope and its contents," I said, turning back to Davis. "And I'll need complete access to interview each family member privately." "I've arranged for the envelope to be brought to the station," Davis replied. "As for the family interviews, Eleanor has agreed to make everyone available tomorrow. They're all arriving for the memorial service." "Perfect. Having them all in one place would allow me to observe their interactions as well as interview them individually. Often, it's what people don't say to each other that reveals the most." "One last thing before we leave," I said, turning back to the desk. "The locked door. Show me exactly how it was found." Davis led me to the study door. "Key was in the lock on this side," he demonstrated with his hand. "Turned to the locked position." I examined the heavy door and its frame carefully. No signs of tampering with the lock, no damage to the frame, none. That's what made this case so perplexing. Without access to the room, how could anyone have shot him? I ran my fingers along the door frame, feeling for inconsistencies. "There's always a way, Chief. Always." As we prepared to leave, I cast one final glance around the study. Gregory Blackwell had spent his last living moments in this room, perhaps realizing too late that someone he trusted had betrayed him. "What do you think happened here, Shernan?" Davis asked quietly. "I think someone very clever created the perfect illusion of an impossible crime," I replied. "And like all illusions, this one will fall apart once we know where to look." The family secrets. The police station in Blackwell Harbor looked more like a quaint New England cottage than a law enforcement facility. White clapboard exterior, green shutters, even window boxes filled with geraniums. Inside, however, it was all business. with Davis's office in the back corner providing the privacy we needed. On his desk sat an evidence bag containing the mysterious envelope. I snapped on latex gloves before carefully removing its contents, 3 handwritten pages and what appeared to be a small key. "Has this been analyzed?" I asked, studying Gregory's distinctive handwriting. "Preliminary examination confirms it's Gregory's handwriting," Davis replied. "The paper is consistent with the stationery he used. The key remains a mystery, doesn't match any locks in the house that we've found." I scanned the first page, which contained what appeared to be notes for a revised will, revision considerations for final will and testament. 1. Eleanor to retain the house and 25 of Blackwell shipping reduced from 51. 2. Michael's share increased to 30 conditional upon. The sentence trailed off without explanation. 3. Diana's share remains at 15, but trust provisions to be restructured. 4. Victor's share reduced to 10 in light of recent revelations. 5. Establishment of separate trust. 20 holdings for preservation of. Again, an incomplete thought. The second page was even more intriguing. Family meeting agenda. Address Victor's mismanagement of Pacific routes, confront Michael regarding the Rotterdam incident. Diana's husband's conflicts of interest with Westlake Shipping, the harbor master situation must be resolved. Eleanor must understand why changes are necessary. The time for secrets has passed. 30 years is long enough. The final page contained a single cryptic paragraph. Should anything happen to me before these matters are resolved, the truth is secured in the place where our fortune began. The key opens the box that contains proof of everything. May God forgive us all for what we've done. I looked up at Davis. What was the Rotterdam incident? He shook his head. Nothing in our investigation turned up anything significant connected to Rotterdam. Michael Blackwell oversees the European shipping routes for the company, but there were no reported incidents around the time of Gregory's death. And what about Victor's mismanagement of the Pacific routes? There were some financial irregularities in the company books around that time, and nothing substantial enough to trigger legal action, but enough that Gregory had apparently noticed. I tapped the paper where it mentioned the harbor master situation. Any idea what this refers to? Davis shifted uncomfortably. Our former harbor master, Jack Winters, resigned abruptly about a month before Gregory's death, moved away without much explanation. We never found any connection to the case. What about Diana's husband? James Patterson? Conflicts of interest with Westlake Shipping? Westlake is Blackwell Shipping's main competitor in the region. Patterson works as a maritime insurance adjuster. There could potentially be some professional overlap there, but again, nothing concrete emerged during our investigation. I studied the small key that had been enclosed with the notes. Brass, antique-looking, with an unusual tooth pattern. And no one has any idea what this might open. We've tried it on every lock in the main house. Eleanor claims not to recognize it. I pocketed the key. I'd like to hold on to this for now. The final line of Gregory's notes kept drawing my attention. May God forgive us all for what we've done. Whatever secrets the Blackwell family was hiding, Gregory had been prepared to expose them. And someone had silenced him permanently to prevent that from happening. Tell me about the family dynamics, I said, leaning back in my chair. Beyond what's in the official reports. Davis sighed heavily. The Blackwells are complicated. Eleanor and Gregory's marriage was solid by all accounts, though some say it was more of a business partnership in later years. Michael, the son, has always been groomed to take over the company, but rumors suggest Gregory wasn't convinced he had what it took. Diana, the daughter, has little interest in the family business. She's an art curator in Boston, only comes back for family events. And Victor, Gregory's brother? Victor has always lived in Gregory's shadow. Handles the Pacific shipping routes but has never had real control. Word is he resented Gregory's tight grip on the company, but there's never been any public animosity between them. I nodded, making notes. what about the in-laws and extended family? Diana's husband, James Patterson, comes from old money but apparently has none left. Married into the family about 8 years ago. Michael's fiancée at the time, Sophia Chen, comes from a rival shipping family based in San Francisco. Eleanor's sister Olivia and her husband Marcus are the least connected to the business he's. A retired professor, she's involved in various charitable foundations. And now they're all returning for this memorial service? Davis nodded. First time they'll all be together since the funeral. Eleanor insisted on it, despite selling the estate. I considered the timing. Interesting that Eleanor would choose now to sell the property and gather everyone together again. Almost as if she's forcing a confrontation, or saying goodbye to the past, Davis suggested. Perhaps, I conceded, though I didn't believe it for a moment. What time will they all have arrived by tomorrow? By noon. The memorial service is scheduled for Sunday afternoon. Perfect. That gave me nearly 2 full days to observe and interview them all. I'll need a complete floor plan of the house and grounds and access to all the original witness statements. Davis pushed a folder across the desk, already prepared. As I began reviewing the floor plan, I couldn't help but wonder about the key in my pocket. What lock did it open, and what secrets would be revealed when I found it? Gregory Blackwell's final message was clear. The truth was hidden somewhere where our fortune began. For a shipping magnate whose family had built their wealth on the sea, that could mean many things. Tomorrow, I would begin unraveling the tangled web of lies, resentments, and secrets that had led to murder. The Blackwell family had maintained their facade for 4 long years. It was time for that facade to crack. The gathering storm. I arrived at the Blackwell estate early the next morning. The sky was overcast, heavy clouds hanging low over the harbor-appropriate weather for what promised to be a tense day. A line of luxury vehicles already filled the circular driveway, indicating that most of the family had arrived. Eleanor met me at the door, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. Detective Shernan. I've informed the family of your investigation. Her tone made it clear how she felt about my presence. They've agreed to cooperate, though I must insist these interviews be conducted with sensitivity to our upcoming memorial. Of course, I replied smoothly. I've arranged to use the library for the interviews, if that's acceptable. Something flickered across her facey annoyance, perhaps, at my presumption. The library would be fine. I've asked Marissa to show you the way. A young woman appeared in the doorway behind Eleanor. This is Marissa Wells, my personal assistant, Eleanor explained. She'll see to your needs while you're here. Marissa Wells was in her early 30s, professionally dressed with an attentive, intelligent expression. The library is ready for you, Detective. Would you like coffee before we begin? I accepted the offer, and as Marissa led me through the house, I studied her carefully. As the person who had discovered the hidden envelope, she was either an innocent party who had stumbled upon important evidence or a deliberate player in a larger game. How long have you worked for Mrs. Blackwell? I asked casually. 3 years, she replied, leading me down a wood-paneled corridor. I started about a year after Mr. Blackwell's death. So you never met Gregory Blackwell? She shook her head. No. Though sometimes I feel like I know him from all the stories. What kind of stories? Marissa hesitated, weighing her words carefully. Mr. Blackwell was formidable. A brilliant businessman, but demanding. Everyone respected him, though not everyone liked him, including his family. Her professional demeanor slipped for just a moment. I shouldn't gossip about my employers, Detective. Finding that envelope must have been quite a shock. I pressed gently. We had reached the library door, and Marissa paused before opening it. It was unexpected, she admitted. I was just doing inventory for the estate sale when I accidentally triggered the mechanism. Accidentally? Her eyes met mine directly. Yes, Detective. Accidentally. Whether she was telling the truth or not, Marissa Wells was clearly observant and discreet, valuable qualities in a personal assistant, and equally valuable to my investigation. I appreciate your help, Ms. Wells. If you think of anything else that might be relevant, please don't hesitate to let me know. The library was a magnificent space, 2 stories tall with a gallery running around the upper level. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, interspersed with tall windows that would have provided ample natural light had the day not been so gloomy. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, while comfortable leather furniture created several intimate seating areas. I chose to set up at a large table near the center of the room, arranging my notes and recording equipment. As I worked, I heard the door open behind me. Detective Shernan, I presume. I turned to find a man in his late 30s observing me with undisguised suspicion. Tall, with the Blackwell family's distinctive blue eyes and strong jawline, he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to power. "Michael Blackwell," I acknowledged, extending my hand. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." His handshake was firm, assessing. I didn't have much choice, did I? Mother made it clear this was happening whether we liked it or not. "Would you prefer I interview someone else first?" A tight smile. "No, let's get this over with. I have a company to run." As Michael took a seat across from me, I assessed him carefully. As Gregory's son and heir apparent, he had perhaps the most obvious motive inheritance of controlling interest in a shipping empire worth billions. Yet according to Gregory's notes, his father had been planning to attach conditions to that inheritance conditions Michael might have found intolerable. "I've reviewed the original statements you gave to police," I began, activating my recorder. "But I'd like to hear in your own words what you remember about the day your father died." Something hardened in Michael's expression. It was supposed to be a standard family meeting. Dad called them quarterly to discuss business and family matters. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "That particular meeting was expected to include some changes to his will. Did he inform you what those changes might be?" "No. Dad played things close to the vest. It was part of his management style. Keep everyone guessing, including family." "That sounds frustrating," I observed. Michael's laugh was short and bitter. "That was Gregory Blackwell for you. Everything was a test, a chess move, even with his own children." "Walk me through that evening." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. We all arrived throughout the day. Dinner was scheduled for 7. Around 5:30, Dad announced he needed time to review some documents before dinner and went into his study. We all continued with our various activities around the house. "What were you doing during that time?" I was on the phone with our Rotterdam office handling a shipping Delia completely routine matter despite what my father's notes might imply. His gaze was challenging. "Yes, I know about the notes. Mother told me what was found. Interesting. Do you know what your father meant by the Rotterdam incident?" Michael's jaw tightened. My father had a habit of dramatizing routine business matters. "There was a shipment delayed in Rotterdam that quarter due to labor disputes at the port. Dad thought I should have anticipated the problem. That's all." His explanation seemed plausible, yet something in his delivery felt rehearsed. "And where were you when your mother discovered your father couldn't be reached in his study?" "I was in the conservatory with my Uncle Victor, discussing the Pacific shipping routes. When we heard my mother calling for help, we both went immediately to the study. The door was locked from the inside, key still in the lock. We had to break it down, took all 3 of us." I consulted my notes. According to the police report, no gun was ever found. Any theories on what happened to it? Something flickered in Michael's isonance, perhaps, or calculation. "If I had theories about the murder weapon, Detective, don't you think I would have shared them with the police 4 years ago? My father was shot in a locked room. Either it was suicide, which the evidence rules out, since no gun was found, or someone somehow managed to shoot him and escape from a locked room, taking the gun with them. Or, I suggested quietly, the scene was staged to look like an impossible crime." Michael leaned forward, eyes hard. "Are you accusing someone in my family of murder, Detective?" "I'm simply following the evidence, Mr. Blackwell." Your father's notes suggest he was about to make significant changes that would have affected everyone in this house. Changes that never happened because he died first. We've all lived under the shadow of suspicion for 4 years, Michael said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Do you have any idea what that's like? To have your community, your employees, even your family wondering if you killed your own father? I held his gaze steadily. No, I don't. But I do know what it's like to seek justice for victims who can no longer speak for themselves. Michael stood abruptly. My father wasn't just a victim, Detective. He was a complicated man who made many enemies of them within his own family. If you're looking for someone with motive, you needn't limit yourself to those of us who stood to inherit. Meaning you should ask my Uncle Victor about the Pacific Route's mismanagement. Ask my brother-in-law about his dealings with Westlake Shipping. Hell, ask my mother what it was like being married to a man who controlled every aspect of her life for 40 years. With that parting shot, Michael strode from the library, leaving me with more questions than answers exactly what I had expected from my first interview. I made additional notes while the conversation was fresh in my mind. Michael Blackwell was intelligent, defensive, and clearly harboring resentments about his father. Whether those resentments had escalated to murder remained to be seen. The library door opened again, and a woman entered elegant, poised with the same striking Blackwell blue eyes as her brother. Detective Shernan? I'm Diana Patterson. I believe I'm next on your list. As I prepared for my second interview, the storm clouds outside grew darker, and the first drops of rain began to patter against the library windows. A fitting backdrop for the storm of secrets I was about to uncover. The tangled web. Diana Patterson settled into the chair across from me with graceful composure. Unlike her brother's barely contained hostility, Diana projected calm sophistication, the kind that comes from years of navigating delicate social situations. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me, Mrs. Patterson, I began. Diana, please, she corrected gently. And let's be honest, Detective. None of us actually agreed to this. We're merely accommodating my mother's wishes during a difficult time. I nodded, acknowledging her point. Nevertheless, I appreciate your cooperation. I'd like to start with your recollection of the day your father died. Diana smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her skirt, gathering her thoughts. It was meant to be one of Father's standard family meetings. He held them quarterly, part family reunion, part business review, and part opportunity for him to remind us all who held the purse strings. Her tone was matter-of-fact, without the bitterness I'd detected in Michael. Were you aware that your father planned to make changes to his will that day? He had hinted as much, Diana replied. Father enjoyed keeping us in suspense about such things. It was his way of maintaining control. Did that bother you? A slight smile curved her lips. Detective, I made peace with my father's controlling nature years ago. Unlike Michael, who was constantly trying to prove himself worthy of the Blackwell legacy, I chose a different path. My husband and I have built our own life in Boston. I have my work at the museum. Father's approval or disapproval affected me far less than it did others in the family. An interesting perspective. Your father's notes mentioned concerns about your husband's conflicts of interest with Westlake Shipping. Can you shed any light on that? Diana's composure flickered briefly. James works in maritime insurance. Occasionally, his firm handles policies for multiple shipping companies, including both Blackwell and Westlake. Father always saw conspiracies where business relationships existed. He was paranoid in his later years. Where were you when your father was killed? In the library, this very room, in fact. I was cataloging some first editions for Mother. She's been considering donations to various institutions. Were you alone? For most of the time, yes. My Aunt Olivia joined me briefly to borrow a book, then left. And when did you learn something had happened to your father? I heard my mother calling for help. By the time I reached the study, Michael and Uncle Victor were already trying to break down the door. I made a note, then shifted gears. Your father's notes mentioned the place where our fortune began as the location of some important truth. Does that phrase mean anything to you? Diana considered this, genuine curiosity crossing her features. The Blackwell fortune began with my great-grandfather's first fishing boat. He eventually built that into a small fleet, which my grandfather expanded into the shipping company we know today. Father was particularly proud of preserving our family's humble beginnings. Is there any place specifically associated with that history? Perhaps a location where that first boat was kept? The original boathouse still stands on the property, though it's mainly used for storage now. Father sometimes went there to think, said it helped him remember where we came from. A promising lead. The boathouse could be the place Gregory had referred to in his notes. One last question, Diana. In your opinion, who had the most to lose from whatever changes your father planned to make to his will? Diana's gaze was direct and unflinching. That would depend on what those changes were, wouldn't it? Michael stood to inherit control of the company, so any threat to that would have affected him most significantly. Uncle Victor has always felt he deserved a larger role in the business. My husband and I had the least financial stake in Father's decisions. And your mother? Something complicated passed across Diana's face. My mother survived 40 years of marriage to Gregory Blackwell, detective. She sacrificed her own ambitions to support his. Whatever changes Father planned, I doubt they would have left Mother vulnerable. As Diana rose to leave, I had one final question. Do you believe your father was murdered by someone in this house? She paused, considering her answer carefully. I believe my father made many enemies over the years, some within these walls, some beyond them. I also believe that whoever killed him was clever enough to create the perfect illusion of an impossible crime. Whether that person was family, I honestly don't know. After Diana left, I consulted my interview schedule. Victor Blackwell, Gregory's brother, was next. As I waited, I found myself contemplating Diana's words. She had painted a picture of a controlling patriarch whose manipulation had affected each family member differently. Michael had struggled under the weight of expectations, while Diana had chosen to distance herself from her father's influence. Yet both siblings had been present when Gregory was murdered. Both had potential motives, and both were intelligent enough to have potentially engineered an impossible crime. The library door opened, and Victor Blackwell entered, a slightly shorter, older version of Gregory based on the photographs I'd seen. In his early 60s, with silver threading through his dark hair, Victor carried himself with the confident bearing of a successful businessman, though his greeting was warmer than either of his niece or nephew had been. Detective Shernan, I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your reputation precedes you. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced. I understand you're trying to make sense of my brother's death after all this time. That's correct, Mr. Blackwell. I appreciate your willingness to speak with me. Victor settled into the chair, completely at ease. Please call me Victor. And of course I'm willing to help. Gregory was my brother. Despite our professional differences, his death left a hole in this family that has never been filled. I activated my recorder once more. Let's start with your relationship with your brother. How would you characterize it? Victor's smile dimmed slightly. Complicated, as most sibling relationships are. Gregory was older by 5 years, and he never let me forget it. When our father passed, Gregory took control of the company. He gave me responsibility for the Pacific shipping routes, but ultimate authority always remained with him. Your brother's notes mentioned concerns about mismanagement of those routes. Can you explain what he might have been referring to? To his credit, Victor didn't flinch. Gregory and I had different approaches to business. He was cautious, traditional. I saw opportunities for expansion in emerging Asian markets that required more significant investment up front. We had disagreed about the direction of the Pacific Division for years. Was there any specific incident that might have prompted his concern? Victor hesitated, weighing his response. There was a financial discrepancy that quarter. One of our vessels required emergency repairs in Singapore. The costs exceeded the approved budget. Gregory was displeased with how I handled it. Displeased enough to reduce your share in the company from 20 to 10, according to his notes? Victor's composure slipped momentarily, surprise and anger flashing across his features before he regained control. I wasn't aware of that specific detail. Interesting. Eleanor hadn't shared that particular aspect of Gregory's notes with her brother-in-law. Where were you in the hours before Gregory's death? I spent most of the afternoon reviewing quarterly reports in my guest room. Around 5, I came downstairs and eventually joined Michael in the conservatory. We were discussing business when we heard Eleanor calling for help. And you helped break down the study door? Victor nodded. It took considerable force. The door was solid oak, locked from the inside. I studied him carefully. In your opinion, Victor, how could someone have murdered your brother in a locked room and then disappeared without a trace? Victor leaned forward, his expression earnest. I've asked myself that question 1,000 times over the past 4 years. The only explanation that makes any sense is that someone managed to lock the door from the outside using some method the police didn't discover. Or, I suggested, the murder didn't happen the way we've all been led to believe. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, meaning appearances can be deceiving, especially when crafted by someone with intimate knowledge of the victim and the surroundings. Victor sat back, a calculating look crossing his face. You sound like you have a theory, detective. I'm developing several, I admitted. One last question. Does the phrase, "the place where our fortune began," have any significance to you? A flicker of recognition crossed Victor's features. That would be the old boathouse, I suppose. My grandfather started the Blackwell Empire with a single fishing boat. Gregory was sentimental about that history, kept some family memorabilia down there. Did you ever see what he kept there? Victor shook his head. The boathouse was Gregory's private retreat. None of us were particularly welcome there. After Victor left, I reviewed my notes from the 3 interviews. Each family member had provided pieces of the puzzle, but none had given me the full picture. All 3 had mentioned the boathouse as the place where their fortune began a location. I was now determined to investigate as soon as possible. But first, I needed to complete my interviews with the remaining family members. Each conversation was revealing not just potential motives, but the complex web of relationships, resentments, and secrets that had defined the Blackwell family long before Gregory's murder. And somewhere within that web was a killer who had managed to create the perfect illusion of an impossible crime. The impossible crime. By mid-afternoon, I had interviewed the remaining family members, each providing their own perspective on the events surrounding Gregory Blackwell's death. Eleanor's sister Olivia and her husband Marcus Richardson had been in their guest room when the murder occurred, both claiming to have been napping before dinner. Neither had a significant financial stake in Gregory's will, though Olivia stood to inherit a modest trust fund. James Patterson, Diana's husband, freely admitted to his financial troubles before marrying into the Blackwell family, but insisted any conflicts of interest with Westlake Shipping were merely proper business relationships being misinterpreted by his suspicious father-in-law. Sophia Chen, who had been Michael Blackwell's fiancée at the time of the murder, provided perhaps the most interesting perspective as the only non-family member present that day. Now, Michael's ex-fiancée, she had ended their engagement 6 months after Gregory's death, claiming the suspicion and tension that had fallen over the family had made their relationship untenable. The Blackwells closed ranks after Gregory died. She'd explained during our interview. It became an us versus them mentality. As an outsider, I was subtly pushed to the margins. Even Michael began to change, becoming more like his father, paranoid, controlling. Throughout these interviews, I'd been piecing together not just alibis and potential motives, but a deeper understanding of the family dynamics that had surrounded Gregory Blackwell. A controlling patriarch who pitted family members against one another. A business empire built on secrets and competitive relationships. A family gathering where everyone had something to lose. The perfect environment for murder. With the interviews complete, I needed to see the boathouse, the place repeatedly identified as where the fortune began, and potentially the location where Gregory had hidden whatever truth he referenced in his notes. The rain had intensified throughout the afternoon, and by the time I made my way across the estate grounds toward the harbor, it was coming down in sheets. The path leading to the boathouse was steep and slippery, winding through carefully landscaped gardens now being pummeled by the deluge. The boathouse itself was a modest structure compared to the mansion-weathered cedar shingles, wide doors facing the water, and a small dock extending into the harbor. Despite its apparent age, it was well maintained, with fresh paint and secure locks. As I approached, I noticed the padlock on the main doors was new incongruously modern against the vintage building. Testing it confirmed my suspicion. The antique key I had found with Gregory's notes wouldn't fit this lock. Moving around to the side, I discovered a smaller entrancea normal door with an older, more substantial lock. I tried the key and it slid in perfectly. With a satisfying click, the mechanism gave way, and the door swung open. Inside, the boathouse was larger than it appeared from the exterior. The central area housed a restored vintage fishing boat, presumably the vessel that had started the Blackwell fortune. Around the perimeter, workbenches and storage areas contained an assortment of maritime equipment, tools, and memorabilia. I moved methodically through the space, searching for anything that might constitute the proof Gregory had mentioned in his note. At the back of the boathouse, a small office area contained a desk and filing cabinet. The desk drawers yielded nothing of interest, but the filing cabinet was locked. I tried the key again, but it didn't fit. Looking more carefully at the filing cabinet, I noticed it wasn't particularly old or valuable, just a standard metal office fixture, seemingly out of place among the carefully preserved historical items. Turning my attention back to the antique fishing boat, I examined it more closely. Beautifully maintained, its wood gleamed with years of careful polishing. A brass plaque on the bow identified it as the Eleanor, interestingly, the same name as Gregory's wife, though the boat predated their marriage by decades. The vessel was small enough that a thorough search didn't take long. In the cabin area, I found a built-in storage compartment beneath one of the benches, and there, finally, the key in my pocket found its purpose, unlocking a small sea chest hidden within the compartment. Inside the chest was a leather-bound ledger, yellow with age, its pages filled with handwritten entries dating back over 30 years. Alongside it lay a small wooden box containing what appeared to be old photographs and letters. As I began to examine these items, a voice from behind me broke the silence. I was wondering how long it would take you to find this place. I turned to find Eleanor Blackwell standing in the doorway, rainwater dripping from her expensive raincoat. Despite the weather, she looked perfectly composed, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Blackwell," I acknowledged, making no move to hide what I'd discovered. "Your husband left some rather specific clues about this location." Eleanor stepped further into the boathouse, her eyes fixed on the open sea chest. Gregory always was fond of his secrets and puzzles. Even in death, he couldn't resist one last game. "This isn't a game," I replied evenly. "This is evidence in a murder investigation. Is it?" She moved closer, her gaze shifting between the ledger and me. "And what exactly do you think you've found, Detective?" I held up the ledger. "I'm not entirely sure yet." "But your husband believed it contained proof of everything, his words, not mine. Given that he was murdered before he could share whatever truth he had discovered, I'd say this is quite significant." Eleanor sighed, suddenly looking every one of her 64 years. "Gregory believed many things toward the end, Detective. He was becoming increasingly paranoid, convinced that family members were conspiring against him and the company. Was he wrong? She considered this, choosing her words carefully. My husband built an empire by being suspicious and calculating. Those qualities made him a successful businessman, but a difficult husband and father. In his final years, the line between legitimate business concerns and paranoid delusions began to blur." "These don't look like delusions," I said, gesturing to the ledger and documents. "These look like records, detailed, methodical records of something your husband considered important enough to hide and protect." Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. You haven't even examined them properly. How would you know what they contain?" "I intend to find out," I replied, closing the sea chest and gathering it under my arm. "These items will need to be logged into evidence and thoroughly examined." "You can't just take family property," Eleanor protested, but her tone lacked conviction. "I can, when it's potential evidence in a homicide investigation," I countered. "But if you'd like to dispute that, you're welcome to call your attorneys. In the meantime, I'd appreciate if you'd join me back at the house. I think it's time we had a frank conversation about what really happened to your husband." Eleanor studied me for a long moment, calculation evident in her eyes. Finally, she nodded. "Very well, Detective, but not in front of the family. If we're going to have this conversation, it will be private." "Agreed." As we made our way back up to the mansion through the driving rain, I couldn't help but feel that a significant shift had just occurred. Whatever secrets had been hidden in that boathouse for the past 4 years, Eleanor Blackwell had known exactly where they were and had chosen not to destroy them, despite having ample opportunity. The question was, why preserve evidence that might incriminate someone in her family? And, more importantly, what exactly did that evidence reveal about Gregory Blackwell's murder? The revelation. The storm had intensified by the time Eleanor and I reached the main house, thunder rolling across the harbor as lightning illuminated the darkening sky. Inside, the atmosphere was equally charged, with family members gathered in tense clusters throughout the main floor. Eleanor led me to a small sitting room off the main hallway, closing the door firmly behind us. "We won't be disturbed here," she said, moving to pour herself a drink from a crystal decanter. She didn't offer me one. I placed the sea chest on a small table between us. "Before we begin, I should inform you that I'll be recording our conversation as part of the official investigation." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Record whatever you wish, Detective." At this point, I have little left to lose. Once my recorder was activated, I opened the conversation directly. "You knew about these documents all along, didn't you?" Eleanor took a measured sip of her drink before responding. "Not initially. Gregory had always been secretive about his private records. It was only about a year after his death that I discovered the key among his personal effects and eventually determined what it opened. And when you found these materials, you chose to leave them in place rather than destroy them. Why?" A bitter smile curved her lips. "Perhaps I'm more sentimental than practical, Detective. Or perhaps I believed that someday the truth would need to emerge." "What truth is that, Mrs. Blackwell?" Eleanor set down her glass and regarded me with tired eyes. "The truth about the Blackwell Empire. About how it was built, maintained, and protected over 3 generations." I opened the ledger, scanning the meticulous entries. Dates, amounts, names some familiar, some not. This appears to be a record of payments. Bribes? Among other things, Eleanor confirmed. The shipping industry has never been as clean and respectable as the Blackwell public image would suggest. Gregory's father established certain practices to ensure the company's success. Gregory continued them. I turned more pages, recognizing names of port officials, customs agents, and even local politicians. "These go back decades. 30 years, Eleanor nodded. Gregory kept immaculate records of every payment, every favor, every compromise made to protect the Blackwell fortune. And this is what he was planning to reveal at the family meeting? Evidence of corruption that could potentially destroy the company and implicate family members? Eleanor laughed softly, the sound entirely without humor. Gregory had no intention of exposing these activities publicly. He was planning to use this information as leverage to force everyone to accept his new terms for the family business and inheritance. Blackmail, I said flatly. He was going to blackmail his own family. He would have called it motivation, Eleanor replied. Gregory believed that Michael lacked the necessary ruthlessness to lead the company, that Victor had become too independent and needed to be reined in, that Diana's husband represented a potential security risk through his connections to Westlake Shipping. The changes to his will were designed to bring the family back under his complete control. Using the threat of exposing decades of criminal activity as his leverage, I concluded, yes. I studied her for a long moment. And how did you feel about your husband's plan? Something hardened in Eleanor's expression. I had spent 40 years supporting Gregory's vision for this family and this company. 40 years subordinating my own desires and ambitions to his. 40 years watching him manipulate our children, pit them against each other, all in service to his legacy. You disapproved. I told him it would destroy the family, she said quietly. That using these records as a weapon against our children would irrevocably damage whatever relationships remained. He dismissed my concerns as he always did. I considered the timeline carefully. Gregory announced he needed time alone in his study around 5:30 p.m. When did you first check on him? Around 6:45. Dinner was at 7 and he hadn't emerged. I knocked, received no answer, and eventually called for help when he wouldn't respond. And during that intervening period, where were you? Eleanor met my gaze directly. I was in my private sitting room adjacent to our bedroom, alone. No witnesses to confirm your whereabouts. None. I gestured to the sea chest. When did you first learn about these records? Gregory had been hinting for weeks that he had insurance against family disloyalty. He didn't explicitly tell me about the ledger, but I knew he was planning something significant for the family meeting. Did anyone else in the family know about these records? Eleanor hesitated before answering. Victor might have suspected. He and Gregory had argued bitterly the week before about the Pacific routes. Gregory implied he had documentation of Victor's. Creative accounting. What about Michael or Diana? I don't believe either of them knew the extent of Gregory's record-keeping. They were aware, in general terms, of some of the company's more questionable practices, but not the detailed history contained in that ledger. I turned my attention to the wooden box of photographs and letters. Inside were images of the Blackwell family spanning decades, along with correspondence between Gregory and various business associates. One photo in particular caught my eye, a younger Gregory shaking hands with a man on a dock, with shipping containers visible in the background. "Who is this?" I asked, showing Eleanor the photograph. She glanced at it briefly. Jack Winters. He was the harbor master here for nearly 20 years, a key ally in ensuring Blackwell shipments received priority handling. The name clicked into place. The same harbor master who had abruptly resigned and left town shortly before Gregory's death. Your husband's notes mentioned the harbor master situation must be resolved. What did he mean by that? Eleanor's expression grew guarded. Jack had become unreliable. He was asking for more money, threatening to expose certain arrangements if his demands weren't met. Gregory was planning to deal with the situation personally. But Winters resigned and left town before that could happen. Yes, her response was clipped. Did someone warn him? Eleanor didn't answer immediately, considering her words carefully. I believe someone in the family may have intervened. Gregory's approach would have been severe. Perhaps someone chose a more diplomatic solution. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, forming a picture of a family empire built on corruption and manipulation, with Gregory Blackwell as its unquestioned ruler. Until someone decided to end his reign permanently. Mrs. Blackwell, given what you've shared about your husband's plans and these records, it seems everyone in your family had reason to want to prevent Gregory from moving forward with his announcement at that family meeting. Yes, she admitted. Everyone had something to lose if Gregory had implemented his plan, including you. Eleanor's smile was sad. Perhaps I had the most to lose, Detective. Not financially. The changes to the will would have maintained my position. But watching Gregory destroy our children with these revelations, that would have been its own kind of death. I leaned forward, asking the question that had been forming since I'd first examined the study where Gregory died. Mrs. Blackwell, do you know who killed your husband? Eleanor held my gaze for a long moment before answering. No, Detective. I do not know with certainty who pulled the trigger, but I have my suspicions. And those would be? I believe someone in this house decided that Gregory's control over this family had to end. Someone who had access to the study before it was locked. Someone who understood what Gregory was planning to do and decided the cost was too high. That describes several people, including yourself, I pointed out. Eleanor didn't flinch. Yes, it does. The locked room, I said. It was staged, wasn't it? To create confusion, to make the crime seem impossible. That would be my assessment as well, she agreed. Do you know how it was done? I have theories, she replied carefully. But no, I cannot tell you with certainty how the room came to be locked from the inside after my husband was already dead. I studied her carefully, noting the precise way she phrased her answer. Eleanor Blackwell was revealing portions of the truth while still protecting something or someone. The memorial service is tomorrow, I said. With everyone gathered, it would be an appropriate time to confront the family with what we've discovered. Eleanor regarded me with sudden intensity. Is that really necessary, Detective? These records implicate not just whoever killed Gregory, but threaten the entire company, and by extension, hundreds of employees who had nothing to do with my husband's death or his questionable business practices. I'm investigating a homicide, Mrs. Blackwell. Justice for your husband, justice? She interrupted, her composure cracking slightly. Gregory spent decades manipulating and controlling everyone around him. He was prepared to use these records to blackmail his own children into submission. Is justice really what you're seeking here, or merely resolution? It was a fair question, and one I'd confronted many times in my career. The truth, then, I amended. The truth about what happened that day. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, weighing invisible options. Finally, she nodded. The truth, then, but not tomorrow, not at the memorial. There's been enough theatrics in this family to last several lifetimes. When? Tonight, she said decisively. After dinner, I'll gather everyone in the main drawing room. You can present what you've learned and ask your questions then. I considered her proposal. A controlled environment might actually be more effective than the emotional setting of the memorial service. Agreed. But I'll need these materials secured until then. I gestured to the ledger and box of documents. Of course, Eleanor agreed readily. Lock them in the safe in Gregory's study if you wish. Only I have the combination, and I give you my word, I won't interfere with your investigation. As our conversation concluded and I secured the evidence, I couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor Blackwell was still directing events according to some plan I didn't fully grasp. She had been surprisingly forthcoming about the family's criminal history, yet remained evasive about certain specifics of her husband's death. Tonight, when the family gathered, I would need to break through those final barriers of deception. Because somewhere in this house was a killer who had carefully constructed the perfect locked room mystery to conceal their crime. And I was now convinced that solving the mechanics of that locked room would reveal the identity of Gregory Blackwell's murderer. The unmasking dinner at the Blackwell estate that evening was a tense affair. Word had spread among the family that I had discovered something significant and that a meeting would follow the meal. As I observed them around the massive dining table, I noted the subtle glances exchanged, the carefully maintained conversations that avoided any mention of Gregory or tomorrow's memorial service. They were a study in controlled facades, the product of generations of wealth and privilege that valued appearance above all else. Yet beneath those polished surfaces, I could sense fear, suspicion, and resignation. They knew the reckoning had finally arrived. After dinner, Eleanor led everyone to the main drawing room, a grand space with a wall of windows overlooking the harbor, where the storm continued to rage. Lightning periodically illuminated the room in stark flashes, followed by the rumble of thunder that seemed to vibrate through the old house. I positioned myself near the fireplace, the sea chest and ledger on a table beside me. Chief Davis had arrived shortly before dinner and now stood quietly near the door, a silent but official presence. Once everyone was seated, an expectant silence fell over the room. 9 faces watched me with varying degrees of apprehension and defiance. It was time to end 4 years of secrets and lies. Thank you all for agreeing to this meeting, I began. As you're aware, I've been investigating the circumstances surrounding Gregory Blackwell's death. Today, I discovered evidence that sheds new light on not only the murder itself, but the motives behind it. I opened the ledger, letting them see the meticulous entries. This ledger contains 30 years of records documenting bribes, payoffs, and other illegal activities undertaken to build and protect the Blackwell shipping empire. According to Mrs. Brait, Blackwell, Gregory intended to use this information at your family meeting 4 years agonot to come clean, but to force each of you to accept his new terms for the company and inheritance. Michael Blackwell was the first to react, his face flushing with anger. Mother, you knew about this? Eleanor's expression remained impassive. I discovered the ledger about a year after your father's death. I chose to leave it where it was. Why? Diana asked, her composed demeanor slipping for the first time. If that ledger contains what the detective says, it could destroy everything the company, our reputations. Perhaps it was time for the truth to come out, Eleanor replied simply. Victor Blackwell leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the ledger. Gregory was going to use this against us? His own family? He considered it motivation, not blackmail, Eleanor said, echoing her earlier words to me. He believed the family was growing too independent, too fractured. This was his way of bringing everyone back in line. James Patterson, Diana's husband, looked pale. Are our names in there? All of us? Not all, I replied. But there are connections that implicate most of you in some way. Michael and Victor most directly through their management roles in the company. Diana and James through knowledge of certain transactions. Even Olivia through charitable foundations that may have been used to launder certain payments. Olivia gasped, turning to her husband Marcus. That's not possible. I never knew. It doesn't matter what you knew, I interrupted gently. What matters is what Gregory believed you knew and what he was planning to do with that information. I turned to Sophia Chen, Michael's ex-fiancée, who had remained silent. Ms. Chen, your family's shipping company operates primarily in Asian markets, the same region Victor Blackwell managed for Blackwell Shipping. Did you ever have reason to believe there were irregular business practices occurring? Sophia looked uncomfortable. There were rumors, nothing concrete, but after Gregory's death, when Michael took greater control of the company, certain competitive advantages Blackwell Shipping had enjoyed seemed to diminish. Michael shot her a betrayed look. That's why you ended our engagement, isn't it? Not because of the family tension you claimed, but because you reported back to your family that we were becoming more legitimate. Sophia didn't deny it. I continued. Gregory Blackwell's murder occurred just before he was planning to use this ledger as leverage against all of you. The timing cannot be coincidental. Someone in this room decided that Gregory needed to be stopped before he could implement his plan. You keep saying someone in this room, James Patterson challenged. But the police investigation concluded it was impossible for anyone to have shot Gregory in a locked study and then disappeared. The door was locked from the inside. The window was secured. How exactly do you suggest this murder occurred? It was the question I'd been waiting for, the central mystery of the locked room that had confounded investigators for 4 years. The answer lies in understanding that what everyone saw when they broke down that study door was not what actually happened, but what the killer wanted you to see, I explained. The locked room was an illusion, a carefully constructed piece of misdirection designed to confuse investigators and protect the murderer. I turned to address the entire room. Gregory Blackwell was not killed at 6:45 p.m. when his body was discovered. He was killed much earlier, likely shortly after he entered his study at 5:30. The killer then arranged the scene, including the locked door, to create the impression that no one could have possibly committed the murder. That's absurd, Michael objected. We found him still warm. The medical examiner estimated time of death consistent with him being killed shortly before we discovered him. The medical examiner estimated time of death based on body temperature and lividity, I countered. But those estimates have a margin of error, particularly when a body has been moved or manipulated after death. A stunned silence fell over the room. Yes, I continued. Gregory was killed elsewhere in the house, then moved to his study after death. The killer then arranged the locked room scenario to create an impossible crime. Eleanor spoke quietly from her seat. You have proof of this theory, Detective? I do, I confirmed. When I examined the study floor today, I noticed subtle inconsistencies in the wood grain pattern of the parquet floor beneath the desk, inconsistencies that would be explained by blood seeping between the wooden pieces and then being meticulously cleaned. But not all of it could be removed from between the joints of the wood. I turned to Chief Davis. Your forensics team can confirm this with luminol testing. There was significant blood spatter that was cleaned up after the fact, more than would have occurred if Gregory had simply been shot while sitting at his desk. Davis nodded. I'll have a team in first thing tomorrow. Furthermore, I continued, the position of Gregory's body in the crime scene photos is slightly inconsistent with how a body would naturally fall after a chest wound while seated. He was positioned in the chair after death. Victor Blackwell looked shaken. But the locked door, the key was in the lock on the inside. Yes, the key was in the lock on the inside, I agreed. But think about the mechanics of that study door. It's an antique mortise lock-on where the key completely passes through the locking mechanism. Such locks can be manipulated from the outside using a simple technique. I explained the method in detail. If you have a second key, you can insert it from the opposite side, pushing the first key partially out. Then, using thin pliers, you can turn the protruding portion of the first key to lock the door. When you withdraw the second key, the first key remains in the lock on the inside, creating the appearance that the door was locked from within. But the door was solid, Michael argued. No gap beneath for tools. No, I agreed. But there is a transom window above the door currently painted shut, but based on the paint layers, it was accessible 4 years ago. Small tools could have been used through that opening to complete the illusion. The stunned expressions around the room told me my explanation had struck home. The impossible locked room mystery had a solution known that implicated someone with intimate knowledge of the house and its features. So, I continued, we have a new timeline. Gregory was killed elsewhere in the house, moved to the study, positioned to appear as though he'd been shot while sitting at his desk. The room was locked using the technique I described, creating the perfect illusion of an impossible crime. This is all speculation, James Patterson protested. You have no actual proof of who killed him. Not yet, I conceded. But we do have this ledger, which provides clear motives for several of you. And we have the matter of the missing murder weapona. .38 caliber revolver that was never found despite extensive searches of the property. I gestured to Chief Davis. The chief has arranged for a team to begin a new search of the grounds tomorrow, using metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar. After 4 years, evidence of a buried weapon should be detectable. Unless it was disposed of in the harbor, Victor pointed out. Possibly, I acknowledged. But killers often keep murder weapons, especially in cases like this, where the weapon might be needed to implicate someone else if suspicions arose. I surveyed the room, noting the increasing tension. Someone in this room planned and executed a near-perfect murder. They created an impossible crime scenario clever enough to confound investigators for 4 years. They were methodical, patient, and intimately familiar with both the house and Gregory's routines. My gaze traveled deliberately from face to face. Only a handful of people possessed both the opportunity and the specific knowledge needed to execute this crime. Based on the evidence I've gathered, I believe I know which of you killed Gregory Blackwell. The drawing room fell completely silent. tension crackling like the lightning that continued to illuminate the stormy night beyond the windows. It was Eleanor who finally broke the silence. "Well, detective, don't keep us in suspense. Who do you believe killed my husband?" I looked directly at her, noting the perfect composure that had never once slipped throughout my investigation. "You did, Mrs. Blackwell." Gasps and murmurs erupted around the room, but Eleanor's expression remained unchanged. Not shock, not outrage, but a strange, sad resignation. "That's ridiculous," Michael protested. "My mother would never." I held up my hand to silence him. "The evidence points clearly in her direction." Eleanor had the most intimate knowledge of Gregory's routines and the house's features. She was the one who supposedly discovered him unresponsive in the study. And most tellingly, she's the one who found the hidden envelope in Gregory's desk 4 years after his death conveniently, just as she was planning to sell the estate. I turned back to Eleanor. "You didn't find that envelope recently, did you? You've had it all along, just as you've known about the ledger in the boathouse. You controlled what information came to light and when." Eleanor's gaze was steady, unblinking. "An interesting theory, Detective." "More than a theory," I countered. "When Chief Davis searches your personal safe, not the one in Gregory's study, but the one hidden in the false bottom of your jewelry box, I believe he'll find the murder weapon. A .38 caliber revolver, likely a family heirloom that couldn't be disposed of for sentimental reasons." For the first time, Eleanor's perfect composure faltered slightly. "You've been in my bedroom?" "No," I admitted. "But Marissa Wells, your assistant, became concerned after finding the envelope in Gregory's desk. She noticed your unusual interest in my investigation and chose to share certain observations with me, including your habit of checking a hidden compartment in your jewelry box whenever you thought no one was watching." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Marissa, who stood quietly at the back of the room, her expression apologetic but determined. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Blackwell, but after finding that envelope..." I couldn't stay silent. I continued my explanation to the stunned family. Eleanor killed Gregory because he was about to use these records to reassert control over all of you, to force you back into submission through what amounted to blackmail. After 40 years of watching him manipulate her children, she decided enough was enough. Diana looked at her mother with dawning comprehension. "Mom, is this true?" Eleanor remained silent for a long moment. The only sound in the room, the persistent drumming of rain against the windows and the occasional rumble of thunder. Finally, she sighed a soft, weary sound of resignation. "Gregory was becoming increasingly paranoid and controlling in his final years," she began quietly. "The ledger was his insurance policy, not just against business rivals, but against his own family. He viewed all of you not as individuals with your own desires and ambitions, but as extensions of himself, pieces to be moved around his personal chessboard." She looked at Michael. "He was going to force you to end your engagement to Sophia because he distrusted her family's connections." To Diana, "He was planning to use evidence of James's inadvertent involvement in a questionable insurance claim to force him to leave both you and his company." To Victor, "He had documented every financial decision you'd made that deviated from his instructions enough to potentially bring criminal charges if he chose to." Eleanor's voice remained steady, but tears had begun to form in her eyes. "For 40 years, I stood by him. I supported him. I raised our children according to his expectations. And in return, he was prepared to destroy each of you to maintain his control." "So you killed him?" I stated quietly. "Not in the study, but elsewhere in the house." Eleanor nodded almost imperceptibly. "In the conservatory. He came to find me before going to his study. We argued about his plans. I had his father's old revolver. I'd taken it from the gun cabinet earlier that day, though I'm not sure I had consciously decided to use it. And after, I prompted gently. I convinced Victor I needed his help with some heavy boxes in the attic while everyone else was occupied elsewhere. While he was upstairs, I moved Gregory's body to the study, positioned him at the desk. I knew about the locking mechanism Gregory had shown me years ago when we first bought the house. The rest happened as you described. The room was deathly quiet as the family absorbed this confession. Eleanor looked at each of her children in turn, her expression finally crumbling into genuine grief. "I couldn't let him destroy you," she whispered. "Everything I've ever done, including this, was to protect you from him." Chief Davis stepped forward, his expression grim but compassionate. "Mrs. Blackwell, I need to place you under arrest for the murder of Gregory Blackwell." Eleanor nodded, rising gracefully from her seat. "I understand. My attorney's contact information is in my desk drawer. Please allow me a moment with my family before we leave." As Davis nodded his assent, I stepped back, giving the family space for a private moment I had no right to witness. The case was solved, the perfect illusion of an impossible crime finally shattered by the simple, devastating truth of a wife and mother who had reached her breaking point after decades of control and manipulation. In the end, the locked room mystery had been clever, but not impenetrable. What had protected Eleanor for 4 years wasn't the mechanical trickery of the locked door, but the family's unconscious unwillingness to consider that the person who had discovered Gregory's body was the same person who had arranged it there in the first place. As I watched Davis lead Eleanor from the room, the storm outside began to abate, the rain softening to a gentle patter against the windows. By morning, it would be clear, the perfect metaphor for a family that could now begin to emerge from the dark shadow that had hung over them for 4 long years. The truth had finally come to light. Whether it brought healing or further pain remained to be seen. Epilogue, the moral of the story. Friends, what you've just heard is not merely a story of murder, but a cautionary tale about the destructive power of control and the desperate lengths to which people will go when pushed beyond their limits. For 40 years, Eleanor Blackwell endured a marriage defined by her husband's manipulation and control. She watched as Gregory systematically attempted to mold their children into extensions of himself, denying them the freedom to become who they truly wanted to be. When faced with his ultimate plan to blackmail his own family into submission, she made a terrible choice that cost Gregory his life and eventually cost her her freedom. As I stood on the dock at Blackwell Harbor one last time before leaving town, I reflected on the moral complexities of this case. Eleanor Blackwell was unquestionably guilty of murder, yet it was difficult not to feel sympathy for a woman who had spent decades watching her family suffer under the weight of her husband's controlling nature. The Blackwell case reminds us that the most dangerous prisons are often invisible, the psychological cages of control, manipulation, and fear that can exist even within seemingly perfect families. Gregory Blackwell used money, power, and secrets as weapons to maintain his dominance. Eleanor's crime, while inexcusable, was born from a desperate desire to free her children from those invisible chains. I wonder, if you found yourself in Eleanor's position witnessing a loved one systematically destroying your family through control and manipulation, what would you do? Would you have the strength to seek help, to find a legal solution? Or might you, too, reach a breaking point where desperate measures seemed like the only option? This is why I share these stories with you, not to sensationalize tragedy, but to help us all recognize the warning signs of control and manipulation in our own lives before they escalate to irreversible outcomes. The Blackwell family is now faced with rebuilding their lives in the aftermath of these revelations. Michael has taken control of the company and implemented significant reforms to eliminate the corrupt practices his father established. Diana and her husband have reconciled and moved abroad to start fresh. Victor has retired from the business entirely. And Eleanor? She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and is currently serving a 15-year sentence. The family visits regularly, their bonds perhaps stronger now than they ever were under Gregory's controlling influence. The ledger and its damning contents were turned over to federal authorities, but in an unexpected act of mercy, prosecutors chose to focus on the current management rather than pursuing historical violations. With Michael's cooperation in cleaning up the company, Blackwell Shipping survived, though significantly changed. If there's one lesson to take from this tragic case, it's this: true family bonds should be built on respect, trust, and the freedom to grow as individuals, not on control, manipulation, and fear. When we try to force others to conform to our vision for their lives, we don't create harmony, we create prisons, and eventually, something has to break. If you're in a relationship defined by control, please seek help before reaching your breaking point. And if you recognize controlling behaviors in yourself, have the courage to change. The consequences of continuing down that path can be devastating for everyone involved. I hope this story has given you something to reflect on. If you found value in it, please share it with someone who might benefit from its message. And consider subscribing to my channel for more investigations into the complexities of human nature and the thin line between justice and tragedy. This is Detective Shernan, signing off. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, the most important mysteries to solve are often the ones within ourselves.